Welcome to Research Talk. I hope you all are doing good. In our previous videos, we talked about how to identify a phenomenon. So let's say you already identified a phenomenon. You dated a phenomenon for some time. And then you decided to go ahead and let's say you applied for Institutional Review Board. You got the approval for going ahead and collecting your data. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about different ways of collecting data in phenomenological research. You could see on the top here, I wrote this, gathering phenomenological materials. So in phenomenology, we avoid using the term data collection. And the reason is the word data collection is, it seems more positivistic. And obviously this term has been used in quantitative research, data collection. So this term is more positivistic connotations. So phenomenologists prefer to use phenomenological materials, and when they refer to data collection, they use the term gathering phenomenological materials. Another reason is, unlike the quantitative research designs, which are more structured, or other qualitative research designs, so before you start your data collection, everything should be pre-specified. What are you going to do? Who are going to talk to? And then once it is predetermined, you don't have flexibility, openness to change those structures. In phenomenology, one of the key features that make it different from other traditions is, as a researcher, you enjoy the freedom, the flexibility, the openness to shift gears in the middle of a research project, depending on how a phenomenon is manifesting, appearing to you as a researcher. So because of this flexibility that we really care and admire, we use the term gathering phenomenological materials for data collection activity rather than data collection. So that's the reason I'm going to use this term in all our conversation on phenomenology whenever I refer to data collection approach. So in today's video, we are going to learn what are some ways to collect data. In phenomenology, data collection can be done in many ways. So first of all, as a researcher, you need to identify what might be some possible means of data collection and what might be some possible materials that will help you get the meanings, get the perceptions, get the experiences from the world to understand the phenomenon that you are exploring. One of the common ways which is often utilized in data collection is interviews. Another important way of data collection is observation. The third popular one is written descriptions. And finally, another important means of gathering phenomenological material is art-based methods. Art-based methods could include drawing, painting, and other ways of collecting data. So these are the four top choices for phenomenologists when it comes to exploring a phenomenon. So let's start with interviews in phenomenological research. Interviews are number one choice. If you look at published research studies in phenomenological traditions, you see they are widely used means to understand a phenomenon. So in interviews, you already know, you talk to the people who have lived the experience, who have gone through the experience that you are trying to explore. So interviews are, I would say, a little different in as compared to other interviews in other quantitative traditions or mixed method traditions or maybe some other qualitative traditions. Interviews in phenomenology, they are first of all very organic, in-depth, dialogic, conversational in nature. What it means? Think about you are trying to understand the intentionality related to the phenomenon. You are talking to people who have lived those experiences, who has lived the phenomenon. So your job as a researcher is to understand those intentionalities, understand the meanings, interpretations that these people are making. So your interviews is obviously going to be very organic in nature, in the sense that you cannot just go and say, oh, I have a list of questions and here is question number 1, question number 2, question number 3. That is not a phenomenological interview. A phenomenological interview is very in-depth, organic in nature, which means that you start with obviously certain orientations, certain broader questions, but you want to go deeper into the meanings. You want to go deeper into the interpretations that these people are making. Also keep in mind that you are talking to these participants who have lived the experience maybe 10 months ago, maybe a couple of years ago, maybe a few weeks ago. So they may not be living the phenomenon in that moment when you are talking to them. So these participants are going back depending on their memories. They are remembering those experiences, making meaning, and then sharing with you. They are making interpretations of those happenings, those experiences. So it's very important that you create a very safe environment and you spend enough time with this participant to get a very in-depth understanding, meanings, interpretations that these people are making from those lived experiences. So interviews are dialogic, conversational, in-depth, and organic. Your purpose when you are, depending on what is your approach, what methodology you are using in phenomenology, whether you are using a descriptive phenomenology by Giorgi, or you are using Max van Manen's interpretative or hermeneutic phenomenological approach, or let's say you are using reflective Lifeworld by Dalberg's methodology. So depending on what methodologies you are using, your interview may be a little bit, in terms of the focus, would be different. So let's look at that too. If you are using descriptive phenomenological approach, you are going to focus on a very detailed description, very rich, thick, detailed description. So during interviews, you ask questions, you invite people to talk, to provide a very detailed description. So you ask clarifying questions, probing questions to gather a very detailed description of the phenomenon that you are exploring. If you are doing an interview where you are, let's say, Van Manen's approach, which is hermeneutic or interpretive approach, you are obviously getting a details about the lived experience, but you are focusing on meanings, interpretations that these people are making. If I'm doing approach, which is Dalberg's approach, which is reflective Lifeworld approach, then you'll be more sort of, I would say, very unstructured, open approach, and you'll be focusing both on meanings as well as detailed description. But overall, no matter what approach do you use, you have to be, the interview is going to be very in-depth, dialogic, conversational in nature, and spend more time. It's not like, okay, I'm going to finish this interview in the next 45 minutes and this is the phenomenon. Remember, your purpose is to explore this phenomenon. In what ways this phenomenon manifests in the life of these people who have lived experiences of the phenomena. So the interview should be pretty depth whenever we say interviews in phenomenology. In terms of structure, an interview, most of the interviews are unstructured, or some I have seen semi-structured. So let's talk about these in more detail. So interviews, as you could see here, structured, unstructured interviews. In phenomenology, we either use semi-structured interviews or completely unstructured interviews. Semi-structured interviews are interviews where, as a phenomenologist, you already have some open-ended questions, a list of questions. They are open-ended, and then you interview your participant using those questions. It does not mean that you cannot add a question during the interview or maybe skip a question. The questions are there to give you more of sense of a guidance, sense of a direction, sense of what all facets of the phenomenon that you want to include, you want to make sure you cover. Unstructured interviews are very popular in phenomenology. Sometimes doctoral students get sort of stressed, confused, like, what do you mean by unstructured? I'm going to talk to this person without any questions, and it might be anxiety provoking sometime, how I'm going to do. So let's discuss what unstructured interview is and how you can have a good, in-depth, meaningful unstructured interview. First of all, unstructured interview does not mean that you don't have any questions with you. So basically what happens in unstructured questions, you first of all develop first of all you spend time reflecting on the phenomenon and also different facets of the phenomenon. So you know the focus of your phenomenon that you are going to talk. You're also aware of some of the components, some of the facets, some of the intentionalities that you want to cover during your interview. So you have some questions in your mind, you know the focus of your research, you know the key facets that you want to explore. At the same time, you are open to anything that the participant brings in that you may not have thought about. So that's how you prepare yourself for an unstructured interview. First of all, familiarize yourself with the phenomenon, understand the focus, understand different facets, understand, and also ready for, if anything, comes up during the conversation, you go there and explore with your participants. So a sense of openness that we are always talking here in phenomenology should also be part of your how you prepare for your unstructured interviews. Unstructured interview also during that process, as I said, this whole process is about thinking, reflecting, discussing, dwelling on the phenomenon. And that is why when you are having unstructured interviews, make sure you have enough time. So if you think that you need maybe like an hour, make it like at least 1.5 hour. Always have some extra time so that there is no hurry. You spend some time reflecting, thinking, discussing, dwelling on the phenomenon with this person. Phenomenological interviews, as I said, they are very in-depth. So Clark Moustakas, he developed a very good protocol, unstructured. It can be used in both structured, semi-structured or unstructured interviews. You can use this protocol when you are having your interviews. And I highly recommend his protocol for phenomenological interviews. So let's understand what this protocol is. In his protocol, he talked about 3 steps, or in a way, he asked you to do 3 interviews with each participant. So you're meeting each participant 3 times. So maybe you meet this person this week, and then after a certain intervals you meet this person again, and then certain interval you meet this person again. So you are meeting each research participant 3 times, and so you are doing 3-part interviews. In terms of content, you can be flexible. However, what he suggests is in interview 1, you focus on life history, sort of past. So if I'm going to talk to a person about, let's say if I did one study where I was interested in exploring lived experiences of compassion and empathy in therapy. So I was interviewing mental health practitioners, counselors. So the first interview, I can focus on the history in the sense my focus is more understanding towards the past. So gathering phenomenological information material related to this person's past experiences related to before the phenomenon happened, right? So before the phenomenon actually took place that I'm exploring, what was happening before that phenomenon? So the first interview, I can focus on gathering materials around that. Taking that same example, I can say, tell me about some initial experiences of empathy and compassion before you become a counselor, a mental health counselor. And this person can tell me stories from their childhood, from their growing up years, what was their experience related to the phenomenon of empathy and compassion. So that's interview 1, where you try to focus on events, experiences that led to the phenomenon that you are exploring. So in a way, you could say pre. The second interview, you focus on the lived experiences of the phenomenon, lived experience. So now you are in current, like present time. So you are asking your questions, you are focusing on your interview on the experience, the phenomenon, and all the details related to that. in third interview, you can focus on reflecting meanings and implications, future orientation. So basically, the third part is more sort of reflections and meanings and like future outlook. So let's take the same example. In my first part of interview, I focused on what were their childhood experiences of empathy, compassion, and focused on that. And then in my second interview, I can focus on after they started their training, their master's program in counseling, and then they started their licensure process and they become an independent practitioners. So what has been their experience during this phase of life when they are in the process of becoming and become a professional mental health counselor? And then in third part, reflecting on the meanings and future outlook, how they think, the experiences of empathy and compassion have changed their clients, themselves, and all those questions. So that is a sort of a structure that Moustakas provide us for 3 interviews with each participant. You can play out with these structures. It's not like this is a set stone structure. Based on your phenomenon that you are exploring, you can play out with that and you can create your own structure. I don't want to use the word structure, but in terms of your own focus, what are you going to focus on each part of these interviews? And I would also say like third part is more about summarization as well, if anything is left out. So when you do your first interview, your second interview, you listen to those interviews and then think about, am I missing anything? Is there something that I need to go back, what is shared in part 1 and part 2, and make sure I get more clarifications, I spend more time there. So third part is also you can use that for that purpose as well. So I highly recommend using Clark Moustakas' recommendation for 3-part interviews in Phenomenology. There are many benefits of using a 3-part interview. Remember, you are exploring a phenomenon with all its complexities. Human experience is always complex. It is always related with the surroundings. We talked about intentionality. A person's experience and all those intentionality surroundings, in the surroundings, you need to capture those complexities. So having a one interview of half an hour, 45 minutes may not be enough to capture all those complexities. That is why I recommend, if you are a doctoral student or a researcher, you can use Moustakas' model of doing interviews. In some situations, let's say if I'm exploring a phenomenon which is pretty straightforward, it's not very complex, in that case maybe it's good to have just one interview. But if you are exploring a phenomenon with any rich complexity, go for 3-part interviews. If you don't think like you don't need 3-part, go for 2-part interviews, because you can explore the phenomenon in part 1, and then in part 2, before you have part 2, you can spend time listening to that part 1, asking yourself questions like, I wonder what I'm missing here. I wonder what else I should ask, maybe some more probing questions to get deeper into the phenomena. So even if you are thinking 3-part is too much for you, I still recommend 2-part interview where you can focus on the phenomenon in part 1, listen to the interviews, prepare your follow-up questions, your probing questions, or something that you want to explore further, and then you can do part 1 and explore those questions. So that is briefly about interviews in phenomenology. I hope what we discussed today has given you some insights, some ways to conducting effective phenomenological interviews to gather good, effective phenomenological material for your study. Thank you very much.